Hello, everyone. My name is Abby Haug, and I'm the Program and Communications Associate with the Inclusive America Project. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon for this webinar on community and solidarity on the front lines, a case study in Seattle, Washington. Before we get started, I want to provide just a couple of tech notes. So we're going to be starting with a panel, but we will leave time at the end for Q&A. And at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a button that says Q&A, and we ask that you leave your questions throughout the entire call in that box. And we'll spend about 25 minutes at the end answering those questions. But again, please feel free to submit those throughout the entirety of our conversation. We are also going to be live tweeting this event on our Inclusive America Project Twitter account, which you can find at Aspen_IAP. We encourage you to follow us along there and also add your own tweets and join the conversation by using the hashtag #InclusiveAmerica. Finally, we are live streaming this conversation on the Aspen Institute YouTube page. And we'll also be able to have a recording afterwards that we can share out with you all. And we encourage you to share this with your family and friends after you join us today. I also want to spend a minute acknowledging that our speakers in DC are located on the original homelands of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank tribes. And our panelists in Seattle are speaking from the original homelands of the Coast Salish, Stillaguamish, Duwamish, and Suquamish tribes. Now I will pass it along to today's moderator, Dr. Jim Wellman, who is the director of the University of Washington's Comparative Religion program, to introduce our speakers and kick off our conversation.
Good afternoon to everyone. We're glad that you're with us this afternoon. In this webinar, we're bringing together key religious figures in the city of Seattle who have negotiated a racially charged and culturally fraught context to seek justice, equality, and equity for all of us in this city of Seattle. And so we're thrilled to have 4 wonderful panelists to join us to talk about these questions and these concerns and really the state of our union. So I want to introduce our speakers now, our panelists. The first is Nikhil Mandalaparthy. He's the Program Associate for the Inclusive America Project at the Aspen Institute. He also serves on the Executive Board of Sadhana, which is a coalition of progressive Hindus. His writing on religion and politics in South Asia and its diaspora has appeared in American, Indian, Pakistani, and international publications. He grew up in Eastside in Woodinville and attended the University of Chicago and received his master's degree there as well. Yes, welcome, Nikhil. Rabbi Rachel Nussbaum is the co-founder, rabbi, and executive director of the Kavanah Cooperative, an independent Jewish community in Seattle. Rachel recently named Newsweek magazine's list of America's top 50 influential rabbis. In addition, she has been the recipient of multiple prestigious awards, and she's passionate about Judaism as an agent for change. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Andre Taylor was ordained as a minister at 18, working as a pimp by age 23, and incarcerated at age 30. Today, he's doing something quite amazing in terms of being an activist, speaker, life coach, co-founder of grassroots organization, Not This Time, in response to the killing of his brother in 2016, and recently named Seattle's Street Czar. Not This Time works with a diverse coalition of Native tribes, Black churches, Asian Pacific Islander groups, Latino organizations, people with disabilities to reform policing in Washington state. So welcome, Andre.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Wonderful being here.
Reverend Angela Ying is the first second-generation Taiwanese American ever ordained in the United States. Angela is founding pastor of Bethany United Church of Christ in Seattle, an intentionally multiracial, multicultural, intergenerational church. Angela's social justice work has been awarded by the City of Seattle recognized by the Obama administration. And the Bethany Church has an amazing array of services to those who are suffering in our city. So we're glad to have her. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all.
So welcome, my friends, to this panel. I want to jump right into it. We have an hour, and then we'll take questions from our audience. And I want to start back in the beginning of this year, if we can think that far back. Let's start by thinking about the fact that Seattle was really the first epicenter of the COVID-19 in this country. And I'm curious, as religious leaders, activists, etc., how did that affect you, the way you build and maintain community? And I want to begin with Angela, if you would.
Great. Thanks. Yes, all of us were hit deeply and continue to be hit deeply by the pandemic. And so at Bethany, where we continue to work in building racial, economic, LGBTQ+, and climate justice, it's really, really important that as people of faith, we continue to figure out ways in which we can build community. So it's, for example, you know, from scripture, you know, love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, we take that seriously. Or even in the Torah and through the prophets, you know, what does the Lord require of us but to do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. So it's very important that we use our faith in the midst of this pandemic to reach out to one another. And one of the things that's been really hard, because as you know, people were saying, you know, things like, oh, this is from China and it's this Chinese, you know, disease, you know, and it's only killing blacks and elders, you know, who cares? But the key piece is it really let us see how interconnected we are, and that there's a deep intersectionality in our work in doing justice as people of faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. What, Angela and others, Rachel, perhaps, you know, in terms of community building for religious communities, you can't be with each other. And just like we are on Zoom, what does that mean for community for us and as religious leaders?
Yeah, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
As you said, Jim, the pandemic hit Seattle early, and I remember talking to some colleagues in other cities that first week and explaining to them the Jewish holiday of Purim was coming, and it would usually be a very large multi-generational community gathering, and we didn't know masks at that point, but the one thing that we did know was that a large multi-generational gathering where people were sitting close together was going to be a bad idea. So we canceled, and I remember trying to persuade colleagues in other cities that they should cancel, and they all thought that I was like crazy at that point. It was in the middle of, still pretty early in March. But my community, Covenant, very quickly pivoted and did an online service, like a Zoom service, to celebrate that holiday, to bring us together. And it was the very first Zoom gathering that we had. And at this point, I feel like it's old hat. Like, we know how to do this so well, because since then we've had funerals and memorial services online, and we've had Shabbat services, and we've had services for all sorts of holidays. But at the beginning, it was like a new skill set of how do you bring people together across geography when people are feeling incredibly fearful, when people are feeling isolated, especially being told to stay in their own homes, and how do you build those bonds? And so that very first Friday night that hit, on Friday night, Jewish communities welcome the Sabbath by lighting candles. We invited people in our community to put candles on their table and to call in at a certain time so that we could all light candles together. And it stuck, and it's now been 40-something weeks, and we're still going with the weekly candle lightings where people come together for this weekly touch point. Because I think that it takes something so concrete to pull people together at this time and create that sense, as Angela said, that we're not in it alone, that we are really experiencing this together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Andrea, I'm thinking in terms of COVID, in the midst of COVID, we have this eruption of a social movement in Seattle, but all across the United States. What was it like for you to be on the streets with the threat of COVID, and yet being called to work for justice in really important ways?
So one of the most important things for my organization was COVID and where ground zero really happened. And the first patient that died up here was actually a dialysis patient. Well, I have prior experiences being a kidney transplant patient, and understanding that this demographic of people, where there are people that are living below the poverty line and a lot of seniors, and because I have an inside, knowledge of the struggles of dialysis patients, I partnered, my organization, not this time, partnered with the City of Seattle and Safeway Corporation. We've given maybe about $50,000 to this date of food gift cards to dialysis patients and staff there. Because as a dialysis patient, you can't go to a food bank because of the high quantity of sodium in the food, just a strict diet. And so we felt that we wanted to at least address probably some real great needs, because sometimes these people are overlooked, in these type of issues and crises. And so that's pretty much where our organization is focusing on, is trying to help ground zero and patients that are extremely susceptible to yet COVID to this day. And that's been our focus.
I would imagine for people on the streets, COVID, this situation, the economic downturn has really made people very vulnerable. And any of you want to respond to just what that's like to deal with people who are intensely vulnerable. And as religious leaders, we want to reach out to them. And what does that mean for you? Anything that comes up?
Yeah, if I could just jump in. So at IAP, Inclusive America Project, we are connected to leaders across the country, faith leaders and community leaders who are working on these issues. And of course, they've all been approaching COVID response in different ways, but a lot of the leaders that we've talked to actually, of course, they're facing a lot of these challenges in connecting people virtually and building community. But one area in which people have really stepped up is that direct service component and putting faith into action on the ground. And I know, for example, like in Seattle, one of the temples that my family would go to growing up, they have pivoted, of course, to digital services, but they've also sponsored this food truck that's now in the U District providing free hot meals. And, that's, I think, where a lot of the energy is going to as well. And of course, I'm sure Rachel and Angela have, examples to speak of that too. But I think we have seen faith communities across the country really stepping up in important ways.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would add to that what Nikhil said, that basically, I mean, the need for mutual aid is huge. I live and our communities live on the south end in the Central District in Seattle, and that's probably the most racially and economically diverse, although we've seen a lot of gentrification happening in the Central District, where in the 70s, it was 60s and 70s, it was 80%, 88% Black, brown communities and families, and now it's probably between 12 and 15. So there's huge change in that. So because of that, to answer what Jim was saying, is like it's so important, and faith communities and Bethany United Church of Christ and others have worked towards building and fighting for, with City Council and others, to get affordable housing beginning back in the Central District. That's so important, along with the South End, because there's been so much gentrification. And what happens is when you uproot these families, whatever, not only are they pushed out of the city because they can't afford it, but then you also have the rising rents. And as people know, the standard of living, is so high in Seattle that so many people, young people, singles, people of color, BIPOC communities cannot afford to live in the city, but they have to work here. So a lot of things that's really important, not only, with the pandemic, having people lose their jobs, or because they have elders they have to take care of that they can't see. How is it that we, as a community of faith, as communities of faith, of all kinds of faith, and I really believe that, even if you don't have faith, God has faith in you. So you have faith. And so each of us are called together to move towards, figuring out how is it, even it was bad before the pandemic, okay? It was bad before, now it's worse. So how do we continue to fight for and work for, housing and education and healthcare for those most vulnerable? That's really important. And Bethany United Church of Christ, with our partners, we have both Got Green, which is involved in our climate justice, REWA, which works with our immigrants and refugees, along with Black Power, which, as many of you know, we fought for years to stop the No New Youth Jail. Unfortunately, it went up, but with the continual work and support, we've been able to have Dal Constantine and others say they will close in a couple of years because we've gotten the numbers for our youth down. And that's a huge thing, because if you think about it, with the pandemic, you do not want young people that are innocent or that have stolen bread or something because they were hungry in a confined place. And so basically, how do we, again, lower and stop mass incarceration of our youth and stop locking them up? That's also a big piece of, this whole thing of what happened because of the pandemic and even beforehand.
Angela, thank you. You kind of brought up a question that I have had. I think many people think of Seattle as very secular, and I think Seattleites think of themselves that way. I'm wondering, what do religious leaders bring to Seattle during these times, during COVID? And I want to talk about Black Lives Matter. What do religious leaders do and bring, and what do you bring that is distinctive and different from secular leadership, which I think many Washingtonians just assume that most people are secular in this region, which is probably true. Yeah, go ahead. Anyone who wants to jump in.
It's a real tightrope to navigate, first of all. Being that Seattle is known for, and the state of Washington is known for being one of the least church states in the country, it's not a popular thing to just put your religion at the forefront, because it could isolate people automatically. With not this time, when my brother was killed in 2016 and I came back home and created Not This Time, to address police accountability in this state. Short story, in 3 years, we were able to, with the largest people of color coalition in the history of this state, lead Washington in being the first and only state with a police accountability law. But never one time that I mentioned what my religious preferences were. I prefer to allow the work to show, right? There's an old saying in the scriptures that said, if you don't believe me, believe the work. And that is a fundamental principle by which I've established Not This Time. The motto of our organization is do the work. So I'm not so much worried about trying to convince somebody and telling anybody about my religious preferences. Allow my religious preferences through the work be a reflection. And if somebody happens to ask me, how'd you get this done? That I can refer, I sure wanted to let you know how I got it done, right? And then the conversation can continue because people are open because they see the success. Right now, we need to keep doing work, producing success in a secular system. And that's been a very hard and difficult thing to juggle.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to jump in there also, because I think, your question, Jim, about this being a secular place is true in the sense of organized religion, and yet all human beings have certain core needs, and those include a search for meaning in life and a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging and a values system. So everyone has those, and the vocabulary perhaps looks a little bit different. But I just want to go back for a second and kind of point out that while you've explicitly asked about the context of COVID and Black Lives Matter, this conversation has also wandered very quickly through topics like housing, healthcare, climate change, gun violence, immigrants and refugees, and more. Like, there's a messiness right now where so many different issues are interconnected, and it feels like so much is up for grabs in this society. Like, the possibilities of what this next year could look like are wide open. We can imagine like worst case scenarios and best case scenarios. And I think at times like that, people are particularly interested in and open to questions of what can give me structure and meaning. And religion can be such a helpful tool in that it goes back to very basic and fundamental principles, like Angela was mentioning, you know, from Jewish tradition. I would elevate the piece that I think most animated my involvement in the, has animated my involvement in the racial justice conversation here. This principle, you know, first of all, that every human being is created in the divine image, that every human being has equal value and worth, and human dignity, like that's built in. And then second, the idea that my story as a Jewish leader connects all the way back to ancient times, to when my ancestors were slaves in the land of Egypt, were oppressed. And that move from oppression to greater freedom becomes the paradigm for like the work that I need to do in the world at all times. And I felt like people have been very receptive to those sorts of messages during this time, just like basic human dignity, basic human morality. We need it right now. Like we're living in a society where that is so much a vacuum. I think we heard that in last night's debate. Actually, it was like on the screen and in front of all of us. And I think this is a place where progressive religious leaders can help restore a conversation that's vitally missing.
I think also we have to look at the history, and especially as a Christian pastor, I mean, we have, there's some really bad history out there. And and currently even, having a so-called Christian, president, whatever, standing in front of a church, making a photo op, right? While he's pepper spraying and hurting peaceful protesters. So I think it's really important that as progressive and loving people of faith, that we continue to show, as Andre and Rachel have said, through our actions, that, hey, it's not just being good for one day. This is a lifelong journey that we are on, and it's out of faith, hope, and love that we're doing it, right? And I think that the key piece is that because of faith, we can sustain it, because of a cloud of witnesses that, historically, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Malcolm X to, Ida Wells to, on and on and on, that these are the people that, when they were young, and I look back, the 60s, I don't think that when John R. Lewis, who later became congressman, when he was on that bridge, and I hope that we make that bridge the John R. Lewis, Memorial Bridge, because it should be. But when they broke his skull, he was standing up for justice, and anti-racism. And you think about it, now our young people are doing the same peaceful protesting out of faith and love. And someday, my hope is that decades later, we will look back and they will look back and go, wow, you stood up for this, in the midst of white supremacy, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of wildfires and floods and, people not caring for climate justice, and that actually we are people of faith made a difference. Yes, because in the 60s, they were just living their lives out of faith and hope. And I think that's what we as progressive leaders are doing the same. We're just getting out there. And as Alice Walker said, just getting up in the morning, is a radical move. So basically, I think that's really important for all of us to know. You are not alone. We are in this together, and we will continue to do racial, economic, LGBTQ+, and climate justice for all.
Yeah, Angela, you can preach it. Hey, listen.
Could I just jump in there right after?
Sure.
I just wanted to provide a perspective so you framed the original question as, Seattle is not a very religious place. I just want to problematize that a little bit and say, I think for a lot of the immigrant communities, especially who are in the, Seattle area, religious institutions are actually kind of very much at the center. So in my experience growing up as part of the Indian community on the east side, it's like temples were where everything happened. And it really was I never had this feeling that I was in a non-religious place, because everyone around me was very much part of this environment. And I think what Angela was just saying about kind of that need for progressive, strong religious leadership, it also gets complicated in this context of all of these, immigrant communities where a lot of the leadership of our religious institutions have tended much more to let's try and blend into the background and just be able to do our own thing and not attract attention. And I saw that over the summer that the temple that was closest to where I grew up, they put out this statement around BLM, but it was very kind of contradictory and didn't actually say much while still trying to say something. And I think there's definitely this generational gap in terms of how their leadership kind of understands the way they want to exist in the community, and that's to not draw so much attention, but that also means they're not speaking up the way that the younger members might want our institutions to react. And so there's like all of these other layers of community and that get, that are part of this conversation as well.
Yeah. Thank you, that's great. I want to get to just this, Seattle witnessed a high-profile protest in the country, and CHOP was built. And I just wonder, I think many in the nation wondered what is going on in Seattle, and perhaps some of us could kind of begin to explain that to the country, and what it meant, and what it means now, even. Yeah. Anyone?
So I think I should speak on it because I was a part of a lot of that activity going up there in CHOP, and was, condemned for some of my activities up there. So let me explain what I'm saying. So CHOP had a multiplicity of what we consider to be leaders, right? There was not one source of leadership there, and that was problematic. And before our new contract with the city as Street Czar, my organization, I had already gone to the CHOP area because I was concerned about the violence going on in there and Black and brown people holding that space. Historically, it hasn't been friendly to Black people with guns, showing guns. So I was very, very concerned about what that looked like and what people could make that look like. So I went and talked to some leaders up there, and I explained to them, listen, I don't think that CHOP is a place, it's an idea, right? And you can't kill an idea. And I'd be willing to try to get you a meeting with the mayor. And so we set that meeting up and they didn't show. So I think that what I've coined the protest of agitation is a lot different from what we done to get police accountability. So there's opposing views about what Not This Time wanted to do would bring people together. That included law enforcement. Now, anytime you include law enforcement with this new protest, you're automatically X'd out. But I understand that things move by relationships, and you have to be willing to build relationships. And so that CHOP area was developed after the killing of George Floyd. One of my main reasons for going there is because a young 19-year-old special needs child was killed up there, and his father asked me to give him some visibility and to help him. So I went up there and said, you've lost a little more standing if you are doing this for George Floyd, but not giving any credence to this young special needs child that was killed. That's problematic, right? So I'm gonna kind of stop there. We can, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but because I was a part of a lot of that going on, explaining to them how they need to move in a system just by the evidence, not by what I'm saying, but I had to work to substantiate my words, trying to help them navigate through systems, right? But they weren't trying to have it. They had a different way of going about things, and so it ended up ending, and they ended up not having anything. So that's my feelings.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andre. Any other comments about that? I think it was a very complex and difficult, traumatic situation for many people.
Yeah, I would love to throw a question back into the mix and to Andre, if that's okay. I mean,
Sure.
I spent a good deal of time in CHOP, like as soon as things were established, there actually was an interfaith clergy table that was set up doing chaplaincy work essentially there. It kind of ties back to that question about what it means to be a religious leader in a very secular kind of a space. But just being present in that space, I felt like my role as a religious leader was to bring some kind of a voice and just a listening presence. But as somebody who shows up, looking white and I don't always feel myself to be exactly white because Jews are also a minority group, and that's its own complicated story. But I look like part of the majority culture, and I was trying to figure out what it meant to be a good white ally there and be present. And one of the things that I noticed was something that Nikhil was talking about in his community earlier, which was a sense of a generational tension, even within the Black leadership here in Seattle, in terms of people having different levels of specific demands. And what you just said, Andre, about the fact that there were multiple leaders helped to make that look a little bit messier from the outside. And so trying to figure out, what does it mean to show up as a white ally, as an anti-racist, to try to move the conversation forward around racial justice and equity when it's not clear what the demands exactly should be, because I'm hearing so many different voices. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit from your position in the Black community here.
So the Black community is 3.5% in Washington state, very small, right? But there's always been an urgency to intervene in situations where violence and guns are that seem to be perpetrated by Black individuals. They dropped a bomb in '84 on folks down there in Philadelphia, the dismantling of the Black Panthers. Anytime there's any violence associated with guns that Black people are holding, this country has not been kind. It has been very abusive. And me seeing what the future could be, also understanding who we have in the White House, I understood that it didn't matter because I wasn't trying to win a popularity contest. What really mattered is to try to make them understand probably what they didn't understand about some of those historic contexts and where this could lead if there wasn't some type of out, right? Because it had gotten messy at that point. 2 people have gotten shot, 2 people were killed. It was time to do something. Right? I couldn't just sit around and not do anything as an African-American, understanding the conditions that we've had in this community. So it's a little different when you're coming from a perspective of a lived history that has been brutal than people looking on the outside saying, how do I be a white ally, right? There's immediate things that needed to be taken place, like with some urgency. And that's what I felt needed to happen.
And there was, I think there was different points of view, even within our religious communities, about Black Lives Matter. I mean, there are significant numbers of evangelicals within Seattle area and Washington State. And I wonder how that mix fit in or didn't fit in with these protests. Any comments on that?
I think it's—
Come on, guys. I don't want to take all the space up.
Okay. I think it's completely connected. I mean, if you think about it, because when the Black Lives Matter, from even before, George Floyd being killed, Breonna Taylor, and a whole host of others. They're from Eric Gardner to Trayvon Martin. I mean, we have a whole host of our poor Black young people. And, because one of the things that Bethany does is to provide safe Black space, right? And the young people and even the mothers tell me, I mean, it's traumatic. I mean, it's like trauma after trauma after trauma. And Black Lives Matter, the reason why, it's not a slogan, it's a way of life. And the reason why is because all lives, as people say, cannot matter until Black Lives Matter. And some people say, well, why isn't it all lives matter? Well, it's because if you look at the history, okay, what have we done from slavery, on, there needs to be serious reparations for, what we have done to our Black brothers and sisters. And so to lift up Black Lives Matter, it means that we're putting them forward because of so much history and damage and racism that has happened throughout our country. And if we look, even from Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, it's not good enough to be not racist, okay? And that denial, he says, is at the heartbeat of racism. What we need to do is work at being anti-racist. And, God bless, Rabbi Rachel, who's trying to be, an ally. But one of the things that we found out is that we can't just be allies. We need to be accomplices, which means if something happens to Andre or something happens to my Black youth, basically I'm there too. you know, and I think that's so important because too many times whites or Asians or and others, you know, when something happens, like we can go safely back to our homes, you know, but not for our Black and brown communities that don't have anywhere to live or don't have food or basically are being, you know, called into gangs because they don't have after school programs. We have worked so hard to build restorative justice programs so that they can go somewhere after school and be safe, especially when their parents are working 2 or 3 jobs. And that is why we have the community of faith. That is why we work together as beloved community, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., to make a difference in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if I can just go off of that, I think like what Angela's point about knowing that history also is really important. And in the work that I've been doing with Sadhana, this progressive Hindu organization, we've been trying to have these conversations within, you know, doing the learning and doing that introspection on how anti-Blackness shows up in our own communities. And I think, you know, one response which we hear from some community members is that it feels like, you know, to say Black Lives Matter is taking away that like we face racism too, and we have, you know, faced discrimination as well. And that really stems from this, lack of understanding of how actually white supremacy is a problem for all of us. And as people who are in kind of the intermediate space between we're not Black and we're not white, we have this tendency to aspire to be more like, you know, to aspire to whiteness, and that involves a lot of people in the South Asian community putting Black people down and perpetuating those same kind of harmful behaviors and stereotypes. And I noticed this in that statement I was talking about with the temple. They mentioned, you know, we condemn police brutality, but we also are thankful to the police officers who keep our community safe. And this is a temple, and when I was in high school, it was vandalized, and, you know, people were spraying all this Nazi swastikas and graffiti. And so of course the leadership there's this conflicting thing of, oh, they kept us safe, so they must be, you know, doing some good. So we can't, it's kind of this disconnect between understanding that actually, no, we're all implicated. And the fact that we as South Asians are in this country together is because of the victories of the civil rights movement and the post-1965 reforms that made immigration possible. So that the lack of understanding of that history, I think, leads to perpetuating a lot of these same harms and not really making any changes.
So let me speak to that, Jim, a little bit, because there's a major conversation going on in Black communities about Black lives and Black lives as far as the organization. And the organization has been problematic to a lot of Black people because of some of their manifesto of saying that they come to dismantle the Western nuclear culture with families. Well, there are Black people around the country that realize that we can't afford no more destruction. We can't, after sentencing laws in '94, Clinton and Biden, that disenfranchised our men, put them in prison, and, you know, we can't afford any more dismantling. So there's a major conversation going on about that within itself, so much so that the organization have removed that from their website. So the conversation is, yes, we do believe in Black lives, but Black Lives Matter is almost like CHOP, with so many different dimensions of leaders in every different city and state. Some of those are white folks that have, you know, taken on and through white liberalism, taken it somewhere else that has nothing to do with the Black community, right? So there's all these little dimensions and stuff that you can be easily distracted. Why most white people here and in Portland are doing most of the marching, and the way that that's going on could be problematic for Black people around the country that have militia groups that are waiting for these type of opportunities to happen to engage. That's not how Black people engage. We've always known the only way that you can beat the system is you have to be 10 times smarter and sharper than the guy that you're trying to apply for the same job with. Now that elevates a culture. But when it comes down to violence, America have never allowed Black people to operate with any violence. White people, yes. So all what's going on out there where violence is taking place, That is not Black people, and is not the way we operate. And whatever you're doing is not for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think we also have to mention, you know, because when there were protests, peaceful protests, you know, when George Floyd could not breathe, and I want to mention that, you know, that he's screaming, I can't breathe, and so when we had protests all over Seattle and all over the country and all over the world, it was really important that people gathered, you know, of all different races, backgrounds, cultures. One of the things that we found out is when we had 20,000 people in Othello neighborhood, okay, and we had children, we had youth, we had elders, we all were masked, we were all, you know, careful and everything. And one thing that we found out, the police weren't there, and nobody was injured. Nobody was hurt. We had babies in arms, you know, and parents masked, whatever, but it was family friendly because we knew we had to get out there on the streets and say, hey, no more. And so part of it is we have to figure out, you know, as people of faith, it's like, yes, you know, it's complicated, but at the same time, why is it, you know, that we could have 20,000 people peacefully protesting and the police aren't there and it's fine? And the minute that, you know, we have a protest and the police show up, whether with a badge or without a badge, they're hurting our young people. That's problematic.
Oh, that's because we have neo-Nazis, the Proud Boys, infiltrating peaceful protests. That's the reason why. I mean, that's the evidence, right? They wait for opportunities like this to then blend themselves in with peaceful protesters, attack law enforcement, blend themselves back in. So now you have an issue with law enforcement trying to decipher who is who. It's a smart strategy. And if I was on the opposing end, I would do the same thing. So there's no secret to how that's happening and what's going on. People are taking advantage of an opportunity, right? And so that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back also to what you said at the very beginning about interconnectedness during this time, Angela, and the imperative for all of us to be working together and across communities for these issues of justice. Like when I hear that call out to Proud Boys to stand by, that's triggering for me as a Jewish leader, because we have, you know, Jews have a memory. Like we know what it means to be calling people to stand by, and we know that genocide could be the result of it. And that's like, that's an insane thing to be thinking about at this moment. And it's not crazy to go there because, you know, that's like, there's such a clearly laid path here. So it's like all of us need to be listening with memory as one of the senses. All of us need to be thinking about this in terms of historical context, and all of us need to be working across the lines of religion or color or ethnicity or any of those other dividers to try to create a coalition that is a force for justice and love and peace, and, you know, it's standing up in the face of that kind of hatred.
Rachel, I have the notion that, you know, we're on land of people who had genocide committed against them. So that memory, that should come into our minds as well. But it just strikes me that we really have to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves, in the sense that to really understand each other's cultures and understand what is really going on, not what is superficially going on. And I think each of you has taken us under the layers and helped us to see something a little bit different than what we see just in the newspapers.
Yeah, Jim, I mean, we just finished this Jewish season of the high holidays, where every individual is called on to do this process that's called teshuvah, which means looking at your own actions and who you are in a very critical way and thinking about what needs improving. But first you have to go back and repair the mistakes. And I want to say that on a societal level, we Americans have never come to terms with these very fundamental, you know, you might call them original sins of our society, that there was a genocide and a stealing of land, and that's fundamental, and we haven't dealt with it. And then there was a stealing of people. you know, from the continent of Africa, and in importing and treating people like property, and like the whole society was built on top of that. And we haven't gone back and unearthed those layers. Like, that's hard work to do on an individual level. When I feel guilty that I lost my patience with my child or whatever, how much harder is it to do it collectively with millions and millions of people engaged in that process? But that's what it's going to take. And that's something that our entire American society is going to have to shift on. And, you know, I want to say a little bit hopefully here, I do think that this mess of all of these crises coming together that we've already talked about, you know, of the politics and the economy and COVID and, you know, all of these pieces, like, starts to lift the corner of the rug a little bit, at least for us to be able to see that ugliness that before perhaps we couldn't as a society quite name. And so perhaps there's an opportunity to do something about it. But this is going to be a long-term project and a lot of hard work over, you know, decades, probably centuries to come.
Why don't we leave and have each one of you give some skills and strategies that really are employed for solidarity across difference, but also the deep dive into history, both among our Black brothers and sisters, but also the native indigenous peoples, but your Jewish memory, Asians on the West Coast were brutalized. So there's things and phenomena and brutality that we need to be aware of. Yeah. Anyway, what strategies to move forward and help people to begin to think in ways that educate themselves, but also educate others?
Yeah, I think I can start off. So at IAP, what we're trying to do is build this infrastructure for what we think of as religious pluralism. And the vision that we have is not a society where we've all transcended our differences and are agreeing with each other on everything, but rather a way in which communities, diverse communities, can coexist together, not just tolerating each other, but actually being able to engage across that sort of difference. And of course, that work is difficult, and it takes a lot of introspection, intra-community learning before you can even start to engage outwardly. But I think, like, in this context of, you know, being from Seattle and what that kind of reckoning that's needed, I think back to, like you mentioned, Jim, like, I think actually those of us who are from this region, we have this mental image that we are kind of the enlightened corner of the country, and we are so progressive and inclusive. And the fact is that actually, no, like you mentioned, the first anti-Asian riots in the country were in Bellingham, which is, you know, just north of Seattle. And Oregon was explicitly envisioned as this white utopia in which Black people were not allowed to settle in. And there's a reason why, as Andre mentioned, there's less than, 3% of the state is Black. And I think these are things which I did not learn at all growing up in the public high school system in Seattle. So I think that the first step is that intra-community learning and educating yourself, and then you can start to face outward and figure out what do we need to do.
Yeah.
So let me just say, as far as my perspective from our community, the moment that the African-American community who have been treated like quote unquote a stepchild, or stop seeking the approval of the dominant society, stop seeking for them to understand, stop seeking for them to say you did a great job, and once we internalize our own value, I think things can begin to shift for us. Because let me just say this, I've said this in other interviews before, America is an empire like every other empire that have conquered lands and people. There is thinkers, particularly white men, who feel that to the victor goes the spoils. So if you're trying to operate in this system like a victim with people who have conquered, who have got to the position and the place that they've gotten to through conquering, then that, you're asking for people up there that are in a dominant society to begin to even care. They know what the hell they did, right? They know exactly what they did. They know what they continue to do. So you're dealing with a mindset of a person that says, we've come, we've got to what we've got to. We're able to make the laws. We're able to make them unjust if we want to. We're able to do whatever the hell we want to do. And until you recognize, especially as a people, recognize the kind of mind that you're dealing with, and we got the evidence over 400 years of that type of mind, right? Then you will begin to think about going at this a whole different way, right? So that's what I'm into. When I came back here with a record that I had over 20-something years ago, being in the street, hustling in the street, changing my life, getting out of prison, lecturing at universities, being on television programs, telling my story of redemption for that kids in my community can understand that there is a story after the streets, that there is life after the streets. That had nothing to do with the dominant society. I didn't change my life to appease white people. I changed my life to empower my own people. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I came here, I didn't come as a victim. I came to fight for my brother. I put a strategy together, and I utilized what I consider to be Black genius to get the job done. Now that's what I'm sharing with my people, so they can understand if this guy with a record like his can do it, how much more can we do it? That's how you change conditions. Not trying to wait on white folks to pat you in the head. You did a good job. We accept you. We understand what we've done wrong. You're dealing with people that got to the position they got to by doing it.
Powerful. Any responses to that from our?
I would talk back to the skills that are needed. I agree with what Nikhil and also Andre was saying. I would share, there's individual skills. So for example, one thing in the midst of the pandemic and the wildfires and, this recession and everything. And I think the key piece, one piece, as I tell, is like, is how is it that you do self-care, right? And it's so important. So eating, eat, sleep, exercise, that's so important. And then the second piece is how do you, with your family and your community. I think that's really important. And so a piece of that is not only, knowing the history, but for me and for others, I think you have to have a framework. And I mean, my faith is really important. But with that faith needs to be an international framework of how I see the world, right? From, all the colonialism and all the dictatorships and all the Nazis or whatever that's happened, all that hatred, so that we as a people don't fall in the tactic of divide and conquer. It goes back to how we are intersectionally, connected, how we're interconnected, how we are bound together as human beings. So the piece of the community skills would be, how do we organize? How do we, as we know and learn our history, and we're not going to get it perfect, but we need to begin. How do we organize? How do we mobilize? How do we make everyday encounters with people that are different than ourselves, but at the same time are using love and learning in the midst of what we're doing? I also want to encourage, everyone, and I know, it starts young. For example, when I had a kid, whatever, I put her on my backpack. We were, for standing against the Iraq war. She went to every single MLK march. Basically, and it's on and on and on. And she is now at voting age at 18, and she has social justice in her DNA. So I want to encourage you, it's never too early. That kids see, just like Andre and others have said, kids see not just what you say, but your actions. So that's so important. It's a skill that we can give to our children, nephews, our nieces, those who we consider our children, whether we have, they're biological or not. That's such an important skill that we're passing it on because our children and our children's children are counting on us. So that's another big skill. Another thing is that talking about what's going on around the kitchen table. Growing up, it was great. And my father tells how, in the Asian context, growing up, he was just around this table and only his dad would talk. Well, he fell asleep in the soup one day and got in big trouble, right? And because of that, when he brought us up, he's like, everybody's going to discuss, what happened in school. We're going to talk about racism, we're going to talk politics, we're going to talk about what's going on in the world, and you do it around the kitchen table. And I think it's really important because when families can do that and really figure out, what's going on and come up with that framework in which we can deal with the bullying, the hate, the divide and conquer, whatever. Then the person even as a teenager, as a young person, can go out there and really feel like, hey, you know what? I have a framework, but not only that, I got my family and my community, and they have my back, right? And that's how we begin to do it. Another skill is, you know, taking time to pray, to meditate, you know, to go on walks, even with that mask, you know, because you need to take care of your body. You know, we are in some seriously dangerous and challenging times, and we need each and every one of you, you know, to keep going. And so that's important, and definitely have a plan to vote. Oh my goodness, that's important. But above all, for me, it's exude love and, you know, spark joy, because, you know, as you know, as you know, mentors have shared with me, it's like, what is it that brings you alive? Well, do that, because what we need is people that are alive in the world. And with 200,000 people that have died, you know, we need people that are alive and that will keep people alive, because you matter.
Thank you, Angela. Nikhil, how about you? Some strategies or skills that have helped you or would help others?
Yeah, I think I shared the, you know, knowing your history and really understanding, particularly as Seattleites and people in Washington State, you know, why things are the way they are, and there's concrete reasons why. And then that education really, of course, shouldn't be a substitute for action, but that should really inform the way that you choose to engage, and then that you show up in the streets or voting booth, or preferably both, you know. But I think Rachel also has some, you know, strategy.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with so many of the things that Nikhil and Andrea and Angela have just shared, and would just add a couple to Angela's list there. That first of all, during this weird pandemic time, one of the things that lots of people have been saying is it's just hard to keep track of time. Like, what day is it? What month is it? It feels like life is all a blur. It's one of the places I think religion can be very helpful, is with that sense of ritual, of just knowing what it means to move through a week, knowing what it means to move through seasons, whatever those rituals are, whether they are religious rituals or secular rituals, like find rituals that are anchoring. That's part of the self-care. And then we've talked a lot about social justice. During this time, this is hard for many people, and in lots of different ways. Like, there's so many different ways that we are being pushed and challenged and triggered right now. And for some people it's about health, and for some people it's about the economy, and for some people it's about all of those things at the same time. But finding somebody else out there who you think is having a harder time or a harder experience, and being able to help, is actually very empowering. Like, I'm assuming that anybody who's watching this call could find a way to get out into the community, whether that is physically into the community or through virtual means, helping others, ends up, I think, contributing greatly to our sense of purpose and our sense of agency at a time where there's so many reasons that we might feel disempowered.
Hey, Jim, let me just say this, and because what I don't want to do is, you know, activism, social justice is very difficult work, especially, you know, if you're Black and brown people. Let me just, because I don't want nobody coming away with feeling like this is something easy if you are attempting to do. Understand me, it'll be the hardest work in your life to try to go up against a system that is so embedded, that has unlimited resources, unlimited power, right? And that could utilize that to stump you in your efforts. If you are intending to want to be an activist or what have you, understand it's the trenches work, the gravel work. And this is a war of attrition. And you're dealing, again, with a system that has unlimited resources, right? This is a war of attrition. They normally win. That's the reality. I'm talking about real stuff, right? Not that I'm saying nobody else isn't, but I need to bring real reality that if you want to push for change, it's going to be the hardest thing in the world. This is a war of attrition that the system normally wins. If the few of us have been successful at pressing through, understand there was a whirlwind we had to come through in order to make it happen. This is nothing easy. This is difficult.
Yeah.
But that's the real.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. That's powerful. You know, I think we're to the place where we're going to ask questions or get questions from the audience. And I think, you know, I'll just read this one. Thank you all for an illuminating discussion. I understand the importance of educating myself before attempting to become a part of the solution. Can any of you recommend starting points for self-education? Yeah, and just, I'll open that up to you all. You know, I wanted to say, and just in response to you, Andre, my sense is that most students come in, and you know, I teach at the University of Washington. Most students come in thinking that success is just about skills for me. And so I develop my skills, I get my connections, and I win my lottery ticket, whatever. But what they don't realize, and especially if they're, you know, white and privileged, is that there might be a system that is not interested in your success and is not giving you a lottery ticket and is not going to encourage you. And I guess what I'm struck by is that religious groups, churches, synagogues, temples, whatever they are there to give you sustenance, a core that can't be touched by external forces, and gives you a value in yourself to go up against whatever monster you have to go up against. And goodness knows there's a lot of monsters. So I'm really, I just know that most students don't think there is a system, and they're just not aware of it. They just think, well, if you just get your skills together, you'll fall into a system that will help you. But that's a powerful warning, I think, and a powerful cautionary tale. But anyway, any other comments on that? Yeah, Nikki.
Sure. So on this question of like self-education, I'm not sure I can recommend what specific thing to start with, but in terms of how to do it, something that we've been doing at IAP earlier this year, we launched this leadership network for faith leaders, community leaders from across the country, and bringing people. Our first cohort was people from Birmingham, Alabama, Chicago, Los Angeles, and we were really trying to create this space for faith leaders and community leaders on the front lines to connect with each other, learn from each other. And something that we kept hearing from them is, it's so great that I have a space where I can talk about these issues with people, where I don't feel like I have that, as the leader of X community back home. And I think that communal aspect is really important in these kind of conversations. That's, you can do this, education work on your own, but it's the really powerful and I think more enriching thing is to do it with others. And that's where you get in disagreements with people, or you talk through things. And I think that leads to a, much deeper understanding. And it's also, it can be a lonely and difficult process otherwise if you're in your own head the whole time. So I don't know if I can say what to read, or if reading is the way to do it, but that doing it in a group, that education, I think that's a really powerful thing we've learned.
Not This Time meets every Wednesday. We have been meeting every Wednesday for almost 5 years now. We have had community meetings. We have had with law enforcement, city council, the mayor, police chiefs. We have invited everybody to our meetings over the past almost 5 years, building the narrative of bringing people together. So, and we continue to do so. And we normally meet at a location, but because of COVID, we do it online. So if people want to go to notthisTime.global, they could find out the Zoom link and be a part of that, our meetings. And my organization is filled with everybody. My organization looks like America. We couldn't do it without that. So just let everybody is welcome. I don't care who you love. We don't care what religion you come from. If you are concerned about racial justice and social equality, please come partner with us. Do some more work with us.
Powerful. Yeah.
I wanted to add to that, and part of it is something that we've done for years, and that is anti-racism training through our Tyree Scott Freedom School. So we train for a whole week or 2 weeks, 15 to 25-year-olds, and they get to hear from all races and backgrounds. They get to hear each other's stories. We also do it for adults, and sometimes their employers, whatever, recommend that they do it, whatever, but at the same time, there's others who really seriously want to do it. And I think that's really important, not just in that way, like Nikhil said, you're not just reading a book, like, for example, How to Become Anti-Racist, which is a very important book. Or even I recently read and met James Foreman Jr., who writes a book called Locking Up Our Own, and the history of how, a lot of times the Black communities, they got the police brutality, but they didn't get the housing, the education, the healthcare. And so that was problematic. But I think a big piece, again, is not to do it alone. Yes, we can read and pray and meditate and exercise by ourselves. At the same time, the communal learning is really important. And to realize we don't have to get it perfect. I mean, when you go to the first anti-racism, training class, or if you go to Not This Time with Andre, whatever, you're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to kind of be nervous. You're going to try to figure out, how, this works. And that's okay. Hopefully by the grace, somebody will say, hey, it's like, we're in this, right? Because that's how you learn. And then whether it's getting out on the streets, with the mask and protesting, whether it's, connecting with young people, whether it's, listening to elders. I mean, there's different ways that you as an individual will find you can connect depending on your passion, depending on what's important to you, what social justice piece or what part that's speaking in your own life that you want to connect with. But yes, do your own studies for sure, but don't let that be the only thing. Broaden it, again, as Nikhil and others and Rabbi, Rachel have said, and Andre, with others, because, how you learn and how we build and how we mobilize together in community is how we're going to have the movement. And it's not just one person. And one of my mentors, I lucked out on the East Coast with Cornel West. I mean, he said one of the things that we made, the problem was we kept saying, to our young people, you got to be successful. You got to be successful. And what we should have been saying is, you can be great. In other words, you can be great by making a difference in this world by being you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. I think I'm really caught by all of your comments. But I really, what I have loved in my religious work and religious studies is being with others who are quite different than myself. And then learning about their system, learning about how they do their work of justice, being, kind of exposing my own prejudice, my own pre-understandings, and then feeling like, oh yeah, I can get beyond that. I can move beyond that prejudice. And one of the ways we've done it, or I've done it at least, is by serving people who are in deep need. And then there's a way in which they then teach you what it means to be human. Whether it's a drug addict or somebody who's on the streets, who tells you the truth about their life and kind of reveals to you the truth of your own. So that's been very powerful for me. So getting out in service to others is really important. Rachel, any quick?
No, I mean, I think I agree with so much of what you just said and what was shared before, and think it's a both and in terms of that self-education piece and beginning to make a difference in terms of starting from a place of one's own comfort zone, whether that's like self-education, I'm going to read when I'm alone at home, or I'm going to talk to my family or spouse or partner about this, or I'm going to start with my own nuclear community first, the people who are most similar to me, and have the conversations in places that feel totally safe, because these are hard conversations to have. And I'm going to stretch myself and put myself out there into diverse groups and be uncomfortable and show up with people who are not exactly like me and who don't think like me. And I actually think that you can do that work of stretching stretch more if you have a really strong foundational base to come back to. So I would say that that's a both and piece, in my opinion.
That's great.
I think the service is really important. I just wanted to mention, because I mean, I felt my calling actually when I was a church volunteer, and they invited a group of us in the church, and it was great. It was mostly older women, you know, in high heels, and myself, you know, and to go visit and volunteer at the prison. Okay. And I was like, whoa, looking at these, you know, decked out Sunday, you know, women. I'm like, man, somebody's got to protect them. Right. So anyway, I was in a PhD program. I went to the prison, and I could still hear the ringing of every single one of those gates closing. I mean, bam, 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 all the way going through security. And I remember one day, there was, and we couldn't ask why they were there, but one day we're just kind of being present with these people. And one woman came up to me, and she was terrified. She had just been put into prison, and she asked me if I would be her cellmate. She didn't know that I was on the other side. And to this day, I really think about her and her family and her kids, you know, and so for me, just like if the question said, you know, what can I do? It's like, sometimes it's just, you know, like this, doing the service, and then, you know, the grace happens in your encounter with somebody different, or something that you've never experienced before that will change your life forever. And then you begin to see the injustice, you know, you get to see, you know, that why is it that our Black youth are in prison? Because they can't pay bail, whereas others can cheat, you know, and spend millions of dollars trying to get into a college, you know, whatever, and say they're on a crew team. It's, you know, it's economics, it's money. It's, you know, it's the gap between the rich and the poor. And so just, again, waking up, figuring out ways in which we can do service for others, and looking beyond ourselves, as we are all connected in humanity, you know, is part of education for ourselves and each other as we mobilize and organize together to make a difference.
So let me speak to that for a minute. I remember teaching at a treatment center, and a guy there, a white guy, he was an attorney, and he liked to help other people in the center, you know. And I had a conversation with him. I said, you know, as a white guy and as, you know, attorney, you feel a sense of pride being able to reach people that in your heart you believe are less than you, right? I said, but you have to be careful, because there's a language in that you might not be understanding or seeing that could really drive somebody away with, while you're thinking you're supporting and helping them. It's easier, especially for people out of the dominant society, to get this feeling of, you know, let me help these lesser people than these little people out here. And, you know, and so you have to be careful, you know, I just know it, because when I go to assist in any capacity, the first thing I want to do is to relate. And because I can relate, because I have a horrible past that I had to overcome, where people feel like, well, sure, what can this guy say to me as far as judgmental, because look where he comes from, right? And it allows it to be a transfer of genuine conversation. Do you know what I'm saying? Because of that space that I allow, and that I share out of my own experiences. And so a lot of times people begin to reject the idea that, you know, we're less than you. Let me just say this real quick. My organization gave the first march here in Seattle after George Floyd was killed. Maybe 12,000 people showed up. But I told white people there, I said, I know that you have been taught something that I want to say to you that you've never heard before. I said, now I'm only saying this to you because me having an organization, I know that many well-meaning white people have come there feeling like we're going to help give Black people a voice. I said, that's extremely problematic for Black people. You don't need to give us a voice. We've been doing marching and stuff for a long time. Not only do you not need to give us a voice, it's condescending to us for you to feel like we're going to help you have a voice. And I said this to white people. You've been taught when you come to Black organizations to check your privilege at the door. I'm going to tell you something different. I don't ever want you to check your privilege. I want you to maintain your privilege. I said, I'm telling you something that hasn't been said. And I said, The reason why I want you to maintain your privilege is because I want you to use that privilege to infiltrate your own damn community, right? And when you use your privilege, the power of your privilege to infiltrate your own community, you bring that to our community. You bring that power source to our community. Mm-hmm. Then we can change things in this country faster than you ever thought. So white people are going to Black and brown organizations and saying, oh, you know, we're just going to check our privilege at the door. Well, what the hell that's going to do? We already don't have no privilege. Keep your privilege, apply your privilege, infiltrate your own communities, make change with the power of your privilege. Mm. Then we could talk about it.
Mm. Yeah, it's good. Nikhil, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Andre, for that reminder. I think that using your privilege to really get into your own community and change what you can with what you are given, that's like absolutely an important step. And I think on the question that I think people are looking for starting points, and there's a few resources dropped into the chat box. I'd always also encourage people to check out IAP's website. We have a range of articles and blog posts, primers, educational resources on pluralism and religious literacy. And particularly, we did this webinar back in July on cultivating anti-racist faith communities with Buddhist, Jewish, and Christian leaders. And that recording is also up to view online. So just a few resources that are out there on IAP's website. I think it's already been dropped in the chat box, but highly encourage people to check those out.
You know, Andre, I think it's great what you just said. I guess I'm going to speak for white people. I guess I can do that, right? My sense is that they're mostly afraid. And they're afraid to go to places where they're not, where people are different from them. And so, you know, so what I would say, and I want to hear what you think, but in my experience, I've lived in Philadelphia, I've lived on the East Coast, and I was a youth leader, and I took groups into the cities, and we went to Black churches, and it was some of the most powerful things that we did. And instead of feeling out of place, we often felt like, wow, this is one of the warmest, most inclusive places we've ever been. And I sometimes, I often think that white people just have no idea what's going on in these other diverse communities. And so I always encourage my students when I teach certain classes to go out, put yourself in a place, allow yourself to be surprised. And in that surprise, you find your own, you realize your own pre-understandings, your own prejudice. And that allows you to overcome that prejudice and really see a new world. And it's like a whole new world. And you know, at least that's been my experience. But I'm just struck because I think, you know, many students are just too afraid. To make that jump. I don't know.
I mean, I can imagine so, but the other question is, again, the posture of going to a Black church. What does that white student feel when he's doing that? Let's talk about, I'm not talking about the secondary, I'm talking about the primary. The primary is he already feels empowered. Everything he looks is practically owned by white people, banks and corporations and grocery stores and the like, and all the buildings and all this stuff, right? So how does he feel going to this Black church? Is he feeling like, oh yes, you know, poor Black people, right? Let me just go have an experience here, but his primary is what I'm talking about. And that's not his fault, right? Which is why I said what I said earlier about Black people's mindset in dealing with dominant society? And will you get to change that? Because until he could seize me as a true equal, and that's not up to him to do, that's up to me to do, right? So when I'm conversating with law enforcement and the governor, they're not looking at Andre, this poor Black guy. They're looking at Andre as somebody extremely powerful in this city and this state that could get the job done. And there's a healthy appreciation of respect towards one another and a healthy fear too, right? So unless that relationship evens itself out, and again, that's not white people's situation to do. It's not on them. It's not us. I'm just trying to explain to you the dynamics of what's been going on in the country for so long and why we haven't had enough movement. And why I've been able, with this coalition, to have the movement, and no other place in the country have been able to have it. We're the only ones with true legislative change in the whole country. So I must be kind of knowing a little bit what I'm talking about. Because when I walk in a room, again, I don't want to belabor the point. It's not little Andre. They respect my mind. They respect my brilliance. They respect the way that we've organized, pulling all people together, law enforcement, politicians, unions, every community. So the work could be done faster. That's all I'm trying to illuminate.
Yep.
I think it's important also. It's important also because, you know, racism doesn't just hurt people of color. I mean, it hurts everyone, right? And it's because what happens is, you know, you have this horrible construct called race where, you know, it goes all the way back where, you know, white people were stripped of their own culture. You know, they forgot, you know, like instead of being Irish or instead of being, you know, British or instead of being, you know, German or whatever. I mean, you're white, right? So it's a construct that's set up so that basically you have in racism, whites believing and out of privilege believe that they're superiority or superior, and then blacks have to deal with this inferiority complex. It's huge. So, and how is it that, you know, as we work together, you realize that, yes, we're equal. And being able to strip that and go through and understand that. But the fear is real. And whoever says that it's not true. The fear is real before, you know, but at the same time, that's where, you know, love or that's where courage comes in. And I think that's really important. Yeah, there are, you know, people asking for resources, and I'm glad Nikhil and others put it out. I would also add, you know, just to get a framework. I mean, you know, faith as well as, you know, social justice. I mean, reading, you know, Cornel West, Race Matters, Democracy Matters. Reading Dr. Ibram, you know, Kendi's, you know, How to Be Anti-Racist. Reading, he was a public defender for, you know, for people after working for Sandra Day O'Connor, whatever. And they said, what? You know, you could have any job you want, any, you know, corporation you want. And yeah, exactly. Caste. It was, you know, he wrote the book, James Foreman Jr. wrote in the book, Locking Up Our Own, you know, Blacks in America. So I think there's also, you know, organizations in Seattle as well as, you know, in our country that remind us, you know, how we can get involved. So yeah, a lot of resources, both within the community and in the libraries and on our websites. And yeah, you know, and so I think it's really, really important. But I also wanted to mention that, and this is what's complicated. I could be racist one minute and anti-racist another minute. I mean, it's humility that's so important, okay? So learning the journey. I can be in a position of power and privilege, you know, as the pastor and the senior pastor, whatever. But as an Asian woman, you know, going to the market or whatever, I could be bullied at any moment. So it's complicated, right? And so life is complicated. So the key piece is in the midst of our fear, how do we use that for good so that we have courage, you know, to love and continue to love our neighbor as ourselves versus, oh, I'm gonna fall for the divide and conquer tactic because, you know, there's so much, because fear in this environment has been implanted, trust me, okay? So we need to be aware of that. and know that. And so when we fear that, when we feel fear, what do we do with it is the key. How do we overcome it? How do we use our fear or our anger for good? So that when we see the anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim, anti-Latino, anti-Asian rhetoric that's going out there, whatever, we could stand up together and know, hey, we're not alone. We're not alone. We're building community, and we're going to use the fear, of whether we're white or Asian or Latinx or Black, or Native American, to say, no, we're not going there. We're going to actually, continue, even no matter how hard it is, as Andre and others have said, no matter how hard it is, to work for good.
Yeah, great. I'm doing a course on theologies of resistance, global theologies of resistance. So there are resources out there. There are amazing stuff out there. So I hope we can encourage people to dig in and to do this important work. I mean, I'm inspired by you all, and I really appreciate your words and wisdom. Any other comments? I think we're about to wrap up, but final comments from this distinguished panel.
Yeah, I love that point, Angela, about humility in this, and agree with it, and think also the complexity here, the nuance, really does come from a perspective of starting from relationships, which is what Andre had talked about before, and seeing human beings as whole people and allowing it to be messy, like rather than distilling and putting people into boxes based on religion or race or any of these other categories that are created, like really being able to hold ourselves in the complexity of the multiple identities, which I think is so much the nature of the beast here in 21st century America. It's complicated, and generationally, it's only becoming more and more nuanced. So we've got to be able to hold that complexity.
So one of my founding principles, pillars of my life is, I don't believe I have to agree with you 100% of the time in order to build with you. And that gives you a large leverage to build with a lot of people.
Good stuff.
In our services, as we close, we not only sing, what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, love, kindness, and walk humbly with you. But we also share something, and I wanted to share this with all of you in the spirit of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and that is that you are beloved. You are beloved, I am beloved, and then everyone says, we are beloved, because all are beloved of God, including you.
I think that's a good way to end.
Yeah, and I just want to also close off by thanking Jim for being a great moderator. And on behalf of IAP, we're really excited to collaborate with the University of Washington. And of course, all of you are our panelists on this conversation. And I just want to flag that once this webinar ends, you'll get a little pop-up to a short survey. And there's so much energy in the chat box right now. If there are topics or resources that you all are looking for, would be interested in future events, please let me know that our work here at IAP is really elevating the voices of faith leaders and community leaders like our panelists today, and of course amplifying that work for larger platforms. So yeah, please, we're really excited to continue this conversation, and yeah, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Holy and mighty God, we give you thanks this day for the gift of gathering, for your word shared. We pray for our congregation and those who are seeking new answers and facing difficult challenges as this continues. We pray for our nation, and especially we pray for the White House staff and leaders in the midst of at least beginning of a mini super spreader event. We ask that all who are suffering from this disease, this virus, can remain healthy, and that we as a nation will do what we have to do to stop it. And we ask all this in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. All right. So what we're taking a look at is first, last week we attended this conference put out by the Aspen Institute and the University of Washington. How many had a chance to look at even a little of it? Okay. Well. Yeah. Okay. Some of you did. Okay. So it was interesting. I didn't exactly know what to expect. And if you say, because, you know, it was kind of a panel, you sort of had, I was talking with Holly earlier. I said, in some ways, it might have been better if we just had one of those guests who could really talk about their full idea, but that's kind of what happens with a panel, you know. But I thought it brought up a lot of interesting things. So, but first, you know, today's goal really is for us to talk about it, try to digest it a little bit. What are a lot of the lessons we can learn? I certainly have some thoughts, but really, I'd love to hear your reactions. And just as a bit of a review, if you listened to it all last, full week ago, it's been a little while, it was called Community and Solidarity. But really what it was about the experience of being, and it was all about localized in Seattle. And so there were a few things I had to look up because they were talking about some very specific things in Seattle. Like, for example, they kept, Andre Taylor mentioned this thing called CHOP several times. That was Capitol Hill, which is a space, organized protest. That was the famous autonomous zone in Seattle and so on. But they had some things that I had to look up to try to figure out what they were exactly speaking about. However, I think the situation in Seattle with they were talking about COVID and being, what does faith look like in the midst of COVID, and worship look like, and community, and the deep divides in dealing with race, and the deep divides in the state as a whole of you have this tiny percentage of the state of Washington are minorities, and of course that's very true in Oregon too. So it's a lot of the things I thought resonated well, but it was really trying to do that. And then toward about halfway through, they really got more into talking about, so what are strategies for discussing this? What are strategies for kind of moving forward? And what can we kind of do? That's the idea of trying to build solidarity, try to build community. And so that's kind of, there were a lot of things discussed. It kind of went several directions. There were 4 panelists and then a moderator. I know the moderator, I don't know any of the panelists. I thought it brought up a lot of really interesting ideas, but just what were your reactions? What were you thinking about? Just feel free to share any questions that might have come up.
I appreciated the work they had done to pull together the coalition. The thing that was, I thought, positive about it is that there were a lot of different players at the table. What I wasn't sure about is how many of the people that they're serving are actually on the organizing team. And for me, that's one of the questions that Terry Moe has nagged me about for only 30 years, is how do you engage the people that are actually the people that are suffering in the midst of this? I heard a lot of agency heads, heads of churches, social service agencies. I didn't hear, and maybe I missed it, I didn't hear anybody talking specifically about, and we had half of our group being people that were on the streets in some ways. And I think what I've learned over the years is that changes the conversation in really a dramatic way. So,
by the way, Pastor Keys, we call that agitation, not nagging. Okay. I mean, in the eye of the beholder, right?
Right.
Or in the ears of the beholder. It was nagging to me.
I was going to say, and that nagging is a good word. I use it often. So.
I'll live up to it. Yeah.
Pastor, I think you make a really good point, though, is that in so many of the conversations we have about marginality, we have the leaders of movements, and while they're still representatives of a group, the large portion of the group isn't there, you know, I mean, and so that, I think that's a really fair point. Other things that you guys noticed or were struck by with this conversation or confused by?
I didn't find anything I disagreed with, which I thought was remarkable for me. So, and some of the things I said are so true. I mean, I like what the professor said, what he has to tell the students when they go out to the real world. That is what I really found out too. When you're in school, everybody is helping you to succeed, and you go in the work world. No, it's not that way at all. So I had a hard time with that, you know, there weren't people, they were all out for themselves, employees.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. He was talking about, if anybody didn't see what he was talking about, was the perception a lot of his students have that they come to college and they want to go get whatever particular skills they'll be particularly given so that they can be successful, and then they get through, and then now I've gotten that ticket for what I need, and then I can go implement it, and then fail to see anything about a systemic structure of anything, right? It's about individuals just go and do things. And this is, I know a lot more about higher education than anything else, really. This is a movement more and more where education is being seen as a personal investment in your future rather than something that is, you know, a social good for everyone that's going to be uplifting the entire community. No, it's because you want to make more money and you want to get a better job. So you go to school and you get particular trainings and then you'll kind of do it. And the problem, and Dr. Wellman was talking about, the problem with that is, of course, it completely fails to see any of these bigger issues going on that are bigger than just a personal ability or a personal choice or, you know, personal, you know, because most of us can understand not everyone has the same opportunities, but as long as we think about it only as individual, then you miss this larger piece. And I think that's what he was talking about. And part of it could lead into this real sense of, and where he was kind of implying that I think it's overstated, but this sense of kind of entitlement that can happen, you know, well, I went and did all these things, so here I am with my, you know, my certificate, so I ought to be able to move forward. But I thought that was
when I worked at US Bank, they came out with a code of ethics on how they wanted employees to behave. You know, you weren't supposed to, you know, gossiping after that came out, you know, ended because it could go against you in your review. And it made it such a nicer company to work under with that code of ethics. And I don't know how if they ever tried to enforce it or what, but I think when it came out, everybody was, oh, well, we better quit talking about other people. I was trying to find something they could use against another employee, thinking that will advance them, just like the politicians. That's what it felt like working there before that code of ethics. And it was a beautiful code of ethics that they came out with.
Yeah, and sort of to relate it a little bit to, you know, this idea, the whole corporation, the whole, you know, whatever situation had to do this at the whole level. It wasn't just ask a few people to be nicer, you know, that's taking it all and instead saying there's a bigger, larger issue here that we could use at the larger level. Of course, the conversation from the community there was about a much bigger thing, but this is how, you know, this the kind of thing, what's a systemic thing you can do rather than simply each individual's kind of in it for themselves to kind of figure out, right? That's what a lot of the conversation last week was really about. How do you address issues at a systemic level which means it's bigger than any one individual. It's bigger than any one time period, right? That's kind of what we're doing. Great. Any other things that really struck you about the discussion?
Yeah.
Looks like Dan, please.
Yeah, I felt like the interface sometime between Andre and what people were saying about what they felt like they could do and how they were moving forward. I mean, it was like his take on it was, but you don't get it. You know, it was just like, you know, all these ideas are great, but you don't get it. And all I could help but feel was, I haven't walked in your shoes. I don't know how to get it. And he seemed really agitated at times. I just think that's what he was saying. He said, you think you're doing all the right things, but you still don't get it. So anyway, anyway, that just really struck me.
Yeah, and maybe we can discuss that a little more about what he was saying and what he felt like was really being missed and some of the concerning things. What did people pick up on here? I certainly have a little bit, because I think this is a really important point. Yeah, Terry, please.
So I made a note about one of his comments towards the end, and he said, you white people need to not just acknowledge your white privilege, but infiltrate your own community and bring that power back to make change. So it's sort of like, who's responsible for the change in our world? The protesters, or the African-American community, the Black community, or do whites have a role in that? And what is the role? And if we don't get it, I agree, we can't really understand any other person within our own culture or family, let alone, you know, across cultures. However, there is, in our tradition, a sense of a call to justice, and that does mean organizing power and resisting those structures that are oppressing anybody. So he also said that white people are mostly afraid to go places where people are different. So put yourself in a place where you can be surprised. And that's a luxury, frankly, you know, with only 3% of our population being Black and 10% being Latinx. It's a privilege to be able to be in a setting where you're actually confronting or engaged with people who are very different than us. So how do we figure that out? How do we do that without using our privilege as a ticket to, you know, kind of ride the backs of people of color or people who are more marginalized?
Yeah. You mentioned several things there that I think are important. The first thing is that you had one thing he said was about privilege, and I think this is important. We've all been talking about privilege a lot lately, and you know, as white people, we have this sense of this privilege. Some of us don't feel it per se. Some of us are not sure what to do with it. And we're really good at kind of confessing that we have privilege. And that's what he was trying to say is, you have something, use it, right? Use it. Don't come and abandon it. He was talking about, you know, people come, when white people come in to Black community, you know, they've been taught, you know, don't be arrogant, so check your privilege at the door. I said, well, we have an abundance of non-privilege. We need some privilege. You use this space, use that position you're in. It made me really think of, you know, seems like a long time ago now, but a few months ago when I started doing these things, we did a whole discussion on vocation. And one of Luther's fundamental views of vocation is where you are in any society, what position you have, you serve in that space using the spaces and places where you are. right? You use where you are in our ordinary, right? Meaning for us, where we are in the positions and places we've been given, that all the influence you can have, you can connect and serve one another. We can be bringing in conversations of justice and meaning and varieties of different things in those spaces. And that was really what he was trying to get at, is saying, if you've got spaces, if you have influences, you know, you're talking about power dynamics, you have some positions of power, use those things, right? Make it a dynamic. And I think that's something that maybe we miss a little bit, because we're, you know, I think a lot of, especially the exploration that a lot of us have been having in the last few months, has been a lot of self-analysis of just saying, well, what is going on? Well, that's kind of nice, but what can we do, right? What can, and I don't know if that's an easy answer, because of course he's talking about, you know, go use that privilege. Well, what does that privilege look like for you? Is it easy to see? Is it easy to grasp? Well, not always, you know, and of course these are big, the whole point was big systemic things, you know, that are bigger than just one individual thing you've been given. This is a huge components, and so we'll have to start really thinking carefully about what are the spaces, what are the things where you do have those influences. It's actually a really good moment for the doctrine of vocation. Where are we? How can we serve? It starts with where are we? Who can we serve, right? And then kind of building from there. There's some other things Terry said that were really good, but just thoughts and reactions to that.
Well, I was hoping I would learn how you could get people of color into your organization. I happen to be a leader in my community neighborhood, and we want to include them. They're part of our neighborhood. They should have the right to stay with us, but to get them to come to a meeting, and if they do, we are really nice trying to make them feel welcome, and then we don't see them again. And then one day I was a walkabout my neighborhood. I think I was handing out flyers for something that our community group was doing. And I bumped into this woman working in her yard. She's a woman of color. And she was so ingrained that things that have happened to her during her life, that she doesn't mix with anybody. I could not get her to change her mind, no matter how nice I was and how I loved to see her take part in the neighborhood. And finally, I had to laugh and say, I'm so sorry what has happened to you in life, that you have these feelings. And because things are different in our neighborhood, and we want to be inclusive. So, you know, that's my problem, is how do you get these people to join us when they see us? We're an all Caucasian group, just because that's, you know, but we don't mean to be that way. I mean, just like our church. Why are we all Caucasian? How do we get these people to join us? But, you know, I was hoping to get that kind of an answer from this, and I did not get that. So any thoughts?
Well, let me ask, anyone have any thoughts about that? Yeah, the other Kathy, please.
Well, I don't know if I have any kind of answers. It's more questions, I guess. I apologize. I didn't see that talk. But I wonder too if the one person that Diane was talking about, if we don't get it, if there was anything in the rest of the discussion about how we're supposed to go about getting it. And also if there were any concrete things. I mean, it's good to talk about how acknowledging our privilege and what we do with privilege and stuff. But I mean, sort of, okay, we need to do this, this, and this, so that we can actually have some progress rather than just talking around and around and around about it.
Yeah, one thing that came up many times by almost every panelist was the focus needs to be on the work, right? On things you're actually doing. In fact, they were asked early on in it, as faith leaders, how is this, because they were all faith leaders, how is this informing you? And that was, they all said, we start by action. And then if someone comes and talks to us, well, why are you doing? Well, let me tell you, I have, kind of thing. But it starts with things you're practically doing. And I was struck by that. Each one of the panelists, they were talking about things they were trying to do. Now, in conversation, it can get real abstracted. That is part of the challenge, but the focus on activity, on doing things, was kind of a key thing. But I want to come back to the first question you had, Kathy, which was about, he was talking about, that I think Diane brought up, that you're just not getting it. You're just not getting it at all. And there's one really key thing where he talked about the way in which he was, Andre Taylor was talking about this in prison ministry, and he's doing different things with prisons. It's more, and he talked to a lawyer who went and really worked with a lot of people in prison and said, you feel really good about yourself because you help all these people you find lesser than yourself, right? You're helping all these poor people out who can't do anything for themselves. He said, well, he said, I'm glad you're doing that work, but you got to be real careful with your rhetoric there. This sense of, if you're going to go and now we'll go help, the phrase, one of the things he was worried about when he said, I'm always really nervous when white people come in, and in Seattle and Portland and so on, in the Black Lives Matter, of course it was majority white people, part of it, and said, well, I'm going to come give them a voice. Well, they already had a voice, right? That now this could be, if you come in and now start by disrespecting the group, then how are we going to move forward? And that, I think, is hard, in the sense of, what does this look like? And, and I think that was Diane, part of what Andre was saying. This is where you're not getting it. This is you have, even maybe a white majority who really wants real, integration. They really want real equality, but there's something inherently difficult to understand. These days we really have thinking about this in, unconscious bias and things like that, that everyone has, and the challenge of, if you're coming to this with the attitude, well, the poor, oppressed people who've been, will allow the marginalized to kind of be here, but not really think of them as really full members of the group in any way, is kind of, I think, part of what he was discussing. But anyone else pick up on this conversation? Because I think this is a really important point for us to think about as a majority white church. Yeah, Kathy, please.
It's just a thought that came to me, is that I understand that, people are upset if you don't get it, and they feel like they're being disrespected and things. But it also can be kind of difficult if you're not getting it, you want to try and get it, but people are not telling you how to get it. So it's like, what am I supposed to do? You're upset because I don't get it, but you're kind of not helping me out here.
There's something that Terry, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to respond to that on a sort of, not that I'm not wanting to read and understand more about different communities. I think that's part of it. But the rabbi talked about teshuva, the repentance, and that it's an individual thing. So that's kind of conversion of the heart. And it's not about getting it so much as having an openness, and then collective repentance. So what would it mean for Resurrection, our community, to sort of do a moral inventory of ourselves, or a spiritual inventory, and say, what's the question, what is preventing people from participating in our community? And it's invisible to us, but it's visible to others. So how do we open ourselves? And it's painful. I mean, that's not easy stuff. And it's not just happening with the snap of a finger. But so it may be a sneaky way around actually like trying to get it by offering our spiritual tradition and going deeper inside repentance, truth and reconciliations, another model. They're calling it something else in Australia. I forget what it's called, but you know, and Mike's left, but he has a vast experience with indigenous people in Alaska, and they're probably the most marginalized in our world, in our society, across the globe, than African Americans, although certainly don't want to dismiss. And there were no native speakers at the, you know, I mean, there was a good representation, but no indigenous people. So, but back to the point, you know, what would it mean to repent?
Well, I think, Terry, the first quick note was interesting. You'll notice in the talk, I think 3 times, they tried to bring up indigenous people and the group couldn't really talk about it. They didn't have, you know, much to say, you know, but the point you make first, I think is really good, about, you know, is the point to fully understand. And you'll notice at the end when they said, what are some strategies? And all of them focused on community, being together and interacting. But I think there's a piece of that they didn't really say, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, is, you know, when we're talking about race issues, is that especially for white people, it's more than this, but I always call it like there's an embarrassment factor that we're like worried about, that if you, you know, you're going to say the wrong thing, you're going to have a poor understanding, so on, and you'll be corrected and then feel really, really guilty that you think now you're a racist, and it's this, it's a moral failing beyond all moral failings, right? I mean, so frequently, I think a lot of us have been led to think of, oh, racism, I've seen that. That's the, you know, the white people screaming at the civil rights activists in the 60s or something like that. And, you know, and saying, so if I'm part of this group, you know, that's, you're being accused of this. And so that embarrassment factor, because when you do interact, you're gonna say things that are incorrect. You're gonna do that. And there has to be a space for there to be 2 things. One, for people to say, I, you know, make whatever statements, whatever ideas, they might be misguided, they might not. And someone else to say, you know, I think you're wrong about that. And then the third step of saying, and that's okay, we can learn and we can build from this understanding. And I think to work together to be able to move forward, we need to have that ability to be open about that. If we're just constantly afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, then the only solution is just never interact at all, right? And then you can't go anywhere. And maybe that's my own personal thing, but I have a sense that that is very frequent. You know, that, you know, someone brings something up in a meeting or something about a race issue and people get real quiet. And I don't think it's always because they have no response. I think it might be because, well, I don't want to be the one to say the bigoted thing, you know, and now all the things that can kind of arise. There's that, you have to, and that's hard, you know. My interactions in my life, because of my experience in comparative religion, so I've had quite a bit of interactions with different Jewish people and so on, because I studied early Judaism was my secondary field. And you say the wrong thing, and, you know, it's ignorant or something, and they say, oh, actually, you really don't want to say it. And often very kindly, but it was, you know, it's embarrassing. And that ability to be able to get in there and not to simply shut people down and say, okay, we're in a space where that can be, you know, we're trying to show, we really are trying to understand, but there's going to be mistakes made. I think that's an important piece to this. But you notice all the people they mentioned at the end, interaction. You can read and try to understand yourself, but you need to see the larger thing. And that's what Rabbi Rachel was talking about, which I think with the community repentance, these are systemic issues for the whole group. It was, you yourself didn't cause racism, and you might even be trying to eradicate it from your own life. But this is bigger, and we need to think about it in communities. And all of that comes with real interaction. I think it's a really important piece. And so then maybe the goal isn't to finally, quote, get it or not, but in fact, just to be able to interact to a point where we could be continually working together, doing something. And I think that was the point maybe Kathy made earlier. What are we actually going to do, right? What's the concrete thing you can actually accomplish and do? I have some other thoughts here, but any further things that you noticed about the conversation?
I like the fellow that talks about Black Lives Matter, and that's so true. He has a total understanding of what's really happening to Black Lives Matter. He says, there's that, then there's these violent protesters that have taken over the segment of Black Lives Matter, which I thought he didn't go for at all, and so that's really sad, because that's giving Black Lives Matter a bad reputation, but it's pretty much been hijacked. It's been put out in the news that it's been hijacked by Antifa rioters who are not kind of declared as terrorists. So I think of last night, those people that were attacking the ICE building, those are just terrorists. And they're, hijacked Black Lives Matter. It's where they're coming from. Like I said, I got on my feed back on next door when I said hooray for Homeland Security, and then our government here wouldn't even work with them, and and I said, wow, it came across they were being paid. They were handing out $100 bills for them to do this, but it's not come out of any news. You're not going to be able to do a search to prove that. So I think the police certainly have an understanding what's going on, and so it's going to be interesting what we find out, what's really happened here. But anyway, he had it right on about Black Lives Matter.
What Andre was talking about with the Black Lives Matter movement was something a little different. What he was discussing was the way in which you understand what Black Lives Matter is that it's not an organization. It's not like there's one, group. It's a movement that's almost started as a hashtag, and there have been some organizations that have risen up. But what he was talking about with the violence was in fact the other thing, which was not, was that far right groups coming into it and inciting things in order to create the perception that Black Lives Matter was a violent thing and so on, and which certainly has happened. And so this is this, and he was talking about this is the challenge of a social movement. What he said is, of course, they want to disrupt this. Of course, they want to take the opportunity to do this. And he said, if I had their ideals, that would be a really good strategy. It's a great way to discredit, right? But it's, he said, this is the fundamental challenge. But I think the point that he made that I think is more helpful for us is to see these are, movement for reform is diverse. Right? It might be easy to see everyone in Black Lives Matter like arguing for like the same thing, and in a big sense, sure, right? Civil rights, representation, these guys. But what that means to different people is gonna be very different, depending, and that is. I think really important to understand. We're not dealing with monolithic entities here.
Black Lives Matter does not have a head like a chairman, Black Lives Matter is not an organization that has, you know, a person that you can go to and talk to, like those other things that came to Portland. They actually have a head of their movement, of their organization, like they have a chairman that you can go talk to. But I don't know about Black Lives Matter. Do they have a chairman ahead of their Black Lives Matter organization?
Black Lives Matter started as a Twitter hashtag. And so it's a variety of people supporting an ideal. Now, there are some organizations that have, but they're not, that have either adopted the name or something, but the movement is it's very similar, if you remember, about, 12 years ago, I can't remember, but the Occupy Wall Street movement, there was no central organization. It's not like there's a nonprofit that runs it or something like that. You know, it's a very diverse thing. Yeah.
So how does Bill O'Reilly's thesaurus has given $33 million to Black Lives Matter? So where does that money go? And it must have a head of their organization to give them that money. Well, interesting to maybe get more into what, Bill O'Reilly's discussion.
I don't know anything
Some
about
people listen
Bill
to Bill O'Reilly every
but
day. I have a friend that just listens to his podcast every day to get all the true information, she says, and what's going on, because he's not controlled by anybody. Some of your news stations are under control.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to move on.
Such a difference. CNN and Fox.
I'm going to interrupt. Kathy, you and I have had this conversation before. Some of the things that you were saying have proven not to be true by very credible sources. Bill O'Reilly is not a news person. He identifies himself as an entertainer. And because what he says often is not true. And that's been proven for over a decade. And so all I'm saying is that if you want to have your beliefs, that's fine. But in this conversation, I think we're stretching the limits of what we're trying to discuss by raising up these other issues. I'm just addressing that. You and I have had 2 conversations on this. I just think let's move on to other topics.
Well, and maybe this could be a transitional moment here, because I think the focus we want to have is on, I think, an earlier question. What are things we could actually do? What are things we could concretely move forward in? And the other Kathy has a question or a thought. Yeah.
Or just a comment. I think that it's sometimes kind of a combination of things. We have an overall look at things and to do things as a group and to help bigger movements come about or change come about. But I think that it's also true that some of the ways that starts in the dialogue is by individual contact, kind of like what Kathy was saying. You invite people to the groups and it can be uncomfortable, but have individual gets together. I'm sorry.
Problem.
But like situations like that, well, maybe the person feels uncomfortable coming to a group thing. It's like, hey, I want to know where you're coming from. Can we go have coffee sometime? Or, I like to walk, do you want to go for a walk or something? And I had a chance one time, people were really nice where I was at an AME church, African Methodist Episcopal, and they were really nice. They talked to me in small groups. I was on the other end. I was the only white person there, and they were super nice. And I've had other things too, where I went through some difficult things and was harassed because of my race, that there was people around me that were kind of the majority, and I was the one that was kind of the other. And so you have to try, I don't know what people feel like. That was only for a short amount of time. So it's not like I had it all my life, but I think trying to connect a bit one-on-one and then moving from that to a larger thing can be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. You know, one thing that I've always thought of is the most important thing we can be doing is discussion, as long as it's not debate. You know, debate at the end of the day, you declare a winner or loser, and it's not a winner or loser as to whose ideas were better, it's who's better at debate, right? Discussion, the posture of discussion is, I want to learn something. There's a perspective you have that I don't share. I'd love to learn more. I'd love to learn what you're thinking. I'd love to learn how you view the world and so on. And that, I think, individually can be really, really positive. It also can be great in a group setting. But for that to work, we have to actually be interested in learning something. Right? Let's go have a conversation so I'll feel better that I've done this is not going to do the job here. Terry, you had a thought.
Well, I mean, it's just been helpful for me to not talk about discussion, but to talk about conversation, because it has within it that word convert. I mean, so it's mutual, and you're not trying to convince somebody, you're trying to learn, but you're also trying to offer, you know, your story. So I use that a lot more than I use discussion. Discussion's like percussion, you know, it's got tension built into it, I think, sometimes. So
I just want to say one thing. I don't agree with Pastor when he said that has not happened. And there's no way to prove where these guys have been given $100 bills to do aggressive rioting at night. I think it'll come out, and there's no search that you can do because it has not been picked up by the news. It came on my feed on Nextdoor. If anybody would like to see that feed I got, I'd be happy to send it to you, because I took that junk out and copied it, because I'm going, really? Wow. And it sounded really credible to the person that was putting that. So I think more will come when they go to trial, and more investigations after this will come out how these people were paid. They're very organized. They all start at midnight. I really like what our acting Secretary of Homeland Security said, that gave out all the details of what they do and how they start at midnight. And I'm thinking it's really good that they do, because although peaceful demonstrators
we'll see. Kathy, excuse me, but we've already heard what you've said. So, and Pastor Mike asked really cordially that we could move on, and you came back to it. So I don't like that.
I really don't like the way he put me off like that.
Well, I mean, then you can deal with that with him or with me.
Really gets to me, because you know, if it's true, I think it's really terrible, because it's not a democracy. These people
I'd like to set up a time individually with you. I'd be happy to do that.
I'll take my off. I won't say anymore.
So I just wanted to finish the thought about conversation versus discussion, case in point. But, you know, to say that in another church, they're doing small circles, and they're calling them different things, but basically around Black Lives Matter or anti-racism. Some of them are reading books and talking. They're mostly white, but some of them are mixed. And they're trying to have a conversation about their own experience and story. And that's a beginning. I don't think it's the end all be all, but it's a start. And I don't see Resurrection even close to that right now. I mean, in terms of the ability to have those kind of conversations, the container isn't strong enough, and the leadership isn't formed to have that kind of a conversation in Resurrection at this point. Is it a goal? I would hope so. And I'm not exactly sure how you get there. But it just can't be a few people who are interested in this if we're thinking about trying to change the culture of our congregation and community, both.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot happened there. But it sounds like Terry, you're going to follow up with Kathy there. So I think that's important. But the discussion, and you see how hard these things can be, how abilities can be. I wanted to just bring one thing up that I was thinking about. It's a book that's been very helpful for me. I used to teach it. It was a class someone else built and I got to teach. And I don't know if the camera will zoom in well enough. Oh, it does, but I think it's backward. It's called Confident Pluralism by John Inazu. Yeah, it inverts the thing, so it's backward written. It's a little book. It's written by a law professor who's not talking about religion very much. It's a very short little thing. And what he's talking about is how can we as a nation and as people come together to form what he calls our modest unity, where there is such division, there's such disagreement about even what's going on in the world around us. And there's a lot happening, and it's a very interesting book, but what he always leads toward is there a space you can find common ground for action? And that sounds obvious, but if you break it down, it's not so obvious. So the first idea is common ground indicates we don't have to fully agree on everything. We don't have to agree on how these movements are starting or how they're being persisted or even what you want the end result to be, so on, because the focus can be, what can we do together? Is there some aspect where we can work together and do something? And there are, I think, here, real opportunities for communities that I think one of the big mistakes we very frequently can make is we've really locked into a level of we want to have so much integrity as a group that we have to agree on everything before, and you have to do everything for the right reason before do nothing at all, so that eventually you just don't, you're still, you don't move forward. And his focus, John Inazu's focus, is there a way that there are things we could agree on that people come together for, usually in social movements, for very different reasons, but they agree they would like a thing accomplished? And how do you have the space for conversation? How do you have the space for interaction? That's kind of what I was hearing throughout all of this. Where is this? Very frequently, the space comes through something we want to do together, something we could agree. And then will there be space for conversation? Absolutely. But it comes through the medium of how are we as a group, and that's why he calls it the modest unity. That you don't agree on a lot of things. In his book, he shows a lot of examples of really, really different people. And that's why he argues, he's a constitutional scholar, the most important right we have in the Bill of Rights is the right of assembly, meaning getting together for the purpose of getting together. It doesn't have to be a say something. There's this ability to be in a community, and I think the point is, and to be able to actually enact things and actually do something. What's a project we could work on together? We might disagree about a lot of things, but we can agree there is a project we could do. Now that creates all kinds of problems in the midst of a pandemic, because how do you actually do that? What we can do a lot of is getting on Zoom and talking, what we're doing right now. What makes it really hard is shared activity, because the one thing we can't do is be around one another as easily. But I've always been attracted to that, because especially now that we're in the place of, it's hard to talk about what are all the things that have happened. Everything seems to be wanted to be debated and in dispute. Can we even, agree about the reality of the world we're living in, a reality of the situations? And very frequently, there's going to be major disagreement. As we were just seeing that a few minutes ago. And I think that's the challenge. If we have to wait to get to the point where we 100% agree, then we can't move very well. If there was one critique I had really for the panel, and I know why they did this, it just wouldn't work otherwise. It was, you had a lot of people who had more or less a pretty similar mindset about making social change. And that made it a nice voice to hear, because you could see kind of, even though it was multiple perspectives, it was more or less one perspective. What we didn't have was, you know, a real contrary position, which I understand why you don't, right, in that situation. But that's the piece where you're talking about community and solidarity. How could we build across difference? Well, then you have to work with difference, right? And you have to be able to do that. And I don't know exactly how that could be done, but what John Anazu says is, many people feel that his proposal is not exactly the American dream. And he said, it's not, but maybe it'll avoid the American nightmare here, you know, that maybe there's something where we can move forward, perhaps modestly, but then in the process, you gain more of a unity with one another. So I've been attracted to that idea. But again, this COVID thing makes it hard. I mean, it just really does. And, but anyway, that I think this is where I hope conversation starts to go. It becomes, Kathy's point, how do you keep coming back to, how do we make this concrete? What do we actually do, right? And I think a lot of us are very clearly saying, I'm not really sure. People talk about all this privilege, but I don't know, you know, it's not something I have in my, you know, safety deposit box I can pull out and use, obviously, you know, and there is things we can do. There are ways to engage, but we have to think creatively, and that's hard. And I think it's going to take time and discernment and things that I don't, you know, I have a lot to learn about that as well. Okay, any other final thoughts? Deb, please.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about just now is I didn't realize I was privileged. So if you don't even realize that you are, I have grandchildren that are half Black. It just never crossed my mind. And throughout my life, I worked at the bank. I knew lots of people. I just never thought about it. So now all of a sudden you're kind of bombarded with it. And like you said, you don't really know what to do with it because you never didn't realize you had it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important discussion. Is kind of, we're really good at talking about privilege and the way that we by birth have, many of us have things, you know, descended just structurally for us. It was easier for us to go to college. It was easier for, you know, more opportunities. But how do you quantify that when you're talking about action in the world? That, I think, is where we have to do some real thinking. You know, the only thing I can think of initially is the way that I mentioned before with vocation in our Lutheran identity. One of the key things Luther was interested in saying was, we're not going to simply throw off the whole of society, the whole of the structures, and say, you're in these structures of the world, use them where you are. And eventually, yes, that is going to make real change, but use that space where you are in the present. You know, he liked to make the distinction between, you have your station in the world that's been presented to you through various circumstances. Some stations are really good, some stations are really bad. And then you have a calling from God. And one's calling is enacted in that station where you are. And what he really wanted to try to make clear is, you're all calling from God are equal. There's no better or worse calling. But stations in the world, now those aren't equal. Those are based on power, right? And everybody is in a different space in those places. And you enact your calling in those spaces where you are. And that, I think, is an important affirmation. That doesn't give us concretely, what are we going to do next month? But it gets us, we focus in our ordinary space. We look at what are the options we have, what are the things we could do. And I think that's an important point. Any other final thoughts?
Could I mention one more thing? Our conversation is so much about pluralism. You know, what we're going to do in this great, big, huge picture of things. And what you're talking about is, I think, day in and day out. You know, right now with COVID, it's really hard to look at this, but you know, like you hear Blacks talk about, well, I hope the next time you see me in the parking lot, you're not gonna walk 3 or 4 cars away so that you stay away from me because I'm this big Black man, or, you know, or go in a different line in the grocery store because there's an African American or Indigenous person in front of you. I just think our actions in just the little things that we do every day, and I know we don't always come across little individual things that we can do, but I think that mindset, we just have to be aware of the little things that happen in our lives where we can say, oh yeah, I'm going to do this different, because that's the only place we can start, is right here. And the conversations are great and they affirm or disaffirm what we're feeling. But I think we all know in our hearts, and when we're in a group, what's the right thing to do. I mean, it always goes back to that bracelet I had the kids wear. What would Jesus do? You know, would you, you know, would you get your kids out of the pool because a little Black boy got in the pool? You know, that's old stuff. But, you know, those are the kinds of things that happen that ingrain this mindset that people have. So anyway, that's just my other 2 cents.
Bring that back.
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
Right. No, thank you. All right, it looks like we're just about closing. I have a meeting here in a little bit, so I have to go. But thank you, everyone, for the conversation. I know these are hard conversations to have. And, you know, I was talking about before, you know, when you're in a diverse situation, the embarrassment factor, the uncomfortableness, you can see that happens with us too, when we're just, you know, and that's a process and a part of this, and that's okay. All right, let's, Kathy, you have a final thought?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to get, you said the confident pluralism was John, what's his last name?
Inazu, I-N-A-Z-U.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's see. Terry, would you close us in prayer?
Well, I was wondering if maybe we could have a woman's voice or a woman leader close with prayer, if somebody would be open to that. I don't know you very well, but you obviously all can pray. So Kathy, how about you? You were just talking. Can you do that?
Oh, I'll try. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us together today to share our insights, ideas, and our variety of experiences and thoughts. Help us always be open to each other, to the people in our community and the world around us. Thank you for all the blessings you've given us, and help us be aware of what we have and what we can share with others. Amen.